You open your eyes. It's dark. Not the kind of dark where you can still make out the ceiling or the glow of a phone or a thin line of light under the door. This is complete darkness, the kind that presses against your face like a physical thing. You're on the ground, not a bed, the ground. Animal skins beneath you, another one pulled over you, and on both sides, within arm's reach, other bodies, warm, breathing. The sound of maybe 15 people sleeping in a space roughly the size of a modern living room. The fire is low. Someone let it drop too far overnight. You can see the orange pulse of it where you're lying. Still alive, but only just. And somewhere out there, maybe 30 meters away, something is moving. You heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Something large, slow, cautious, testing the edge of firelight. This is a normal morning, 50,000 years ago. Before cities, before farming, before writing or wheels or any of the things we use to separate ourselves from the animal world. This is just a Tuesday. And by the time the sun goes down, you will have made hundreds of small decisions about fire, about food, about who to trust and where to sleep, and every single one of them will matter in a way that nothing like you ever quite does. This is the story of what a normal day actually looked like for an early human. And I promise you, it is nothing like you imagine, and everything like you've always known.
Let's start with what most people get wrong. When we picture prehistoric life, we picture drama. We picture spear throws and mammoth hunts and narrow escapes from things with teeth. We picture urgency, constant motion, a life lived at the edge of extinction every single moment. And those moments existed. Of course they did. But here's the thing nobody tells you. Most of a prehistoric day wasn't that. Most of it was what most of any human day has always been. Sitting, waiting, doing small tasks with your hands, talking, watching children play, staring into a fire, thinking about nothing in particular.
Researchers who study hunter-gatherer societies that survived into the modern era, the San people of southern Africa, Aboriginal Australians, the Hadza of Tanzania, consistently find the same thing. Adults in these groups typically spent somewhere between 3 and 5 hours a day on actual subsistence work, foraging, hunting, preparing food. 3 to 5 hours. The rest of the day was, by modern standards, unstructured. Which means your early human ancestor on an average day had more free time than you do. Let that sit for a moment. The person sleeping next to a dying fire 5,000 years ago with something large moving in the dark outside, that person worked less hours per day than you do. They just spent their free time differently, and they slept with considerably more things trying to eat them. So what did that day actually look like? Let's walk through it, hour by hour, from the moment the fire gets dangerously low to the moment darkness falls again. The real business of survival begins.
The first thing that happens every morning is the fire. Before anyone eats, before anyone speaks, before anyone decides what the day is going to look like, someone tends the fire. This is not optional. This is not a chore that gets skipped on lazy mornings. The fire is the reason the group survived the night. It's the reason that thing at the edge of the darkness stayed at the edge of the darkness instead of walking through it. And if it goes out completely, relighting it is not as simple as reaching for a lighter. It can take 20 minutes of sustained effort, friction and breath and careful coaxing, and that's if you're good at it and the wood is dry and the conditions cooperate. So the fire never goes out. Somebody always wakes up early enough to feed it. In most hunter-gatherer groups that have been studied, this role rotates. It's a shared responsibility, not assigned to one person, but it is always done. Every morning, without exception, for 2.5 million years of human history. Think about that. 2.5 million years of someone waking up before dawn to keep a fire alive. Before your great anything was even human-shaped, their ancestors were doing this, waking up cold, in the dark, and feeding the fire. Once the fire is stable, people begin to stir, not all at once, gradually, the way people actually wake up when there's no alarm forcing synchrony. Children first, usually. Prehistoric children, like modern children, had apparently not yet received the message that mornings should be approached with caution. Adults, slower. The elderly, slowest of all. There is no breakfast as we understand it. This is one of the things that surprises people most. The idea of a structured morning meal, something you sit down to, something that exists specifically to start the day, is actually a relatively recent cultural invention. For most of human prehistory, you ate when there was food, and you ate what was available. And the first food of the day might come within an hour of waking, or it might come 4 hours later, depending entirely on what the landscape offered.
What did they eat? In the morning, probably leftovers from the previous day. Tubers that had been roasted the night before, dried meat if they had it, berries and nuts that had been gathered and stored. The early morning wasn't typically a hunting time. Light was needed for that, and the group needed to assess the day first. So they sat around the fire, and they talked. This is the part that gets left out of almost every documentary you've ever seen about prehistoric humans. They talked constantly. Language, or at least sophisticated vocal communication capable of conveying complex information, almost certainly predates Homo sapiens. By the time we're talking about fully modern humans 50,000 years ago, language was not new. It had been developing and becoming more complex for hundreds of thousands of years. These were not grunting creatures gesturing at the horizon. These were people. People who had opinions and grievances and stories and jokes. Anthropologists who study modern hunter-gatherer groups report that conversation occupies a remarkable percentage of waking hours, and the topics are not limited to survival strategy. People talk about other people. They gossip, they speculate, they reminisce, describe dreams, they complain about things that annoy them. The specific content of a conversation around a prehistoric fire 50,000 years ago is obviously beyond what we can recover, but the social architecture of it, that we can infer, and it looks like this. The group, probably between 15 and 30 people, the typical band size for hunter-gatherers, has a social web of extraordinary complexity. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone knows the history between everyone. Who is reliable, who is prone to anger, who is good in a crisis, who cannot be trusted with the last of the dried meat. All of this is maintained through talk. Grooming is also happening. Not just social grooming in the metaphorical sense, actual physical grooming. Checking for parasites, which were a genuine daily concern. Fixing hair, tending small wounds. The physical care of each other's bodies was a social act, the same way it is in every primate species. And it served the same function it serves in chimpanzees and bonobos. It built and maintained the bonds that made collective survival possible. By the time the sun is fully up, the day's main work is beginning. The group splits. This is one of the most consistent patterns across hunter-gatherer societies. Daily division of labor, organized loosely, not rigidly, not always by gender, though gender patterns do appear in most groups, around different subsistence tasks. Some people go out to forage, some remain at the camp. If a hunt is being planned, a smaller group of the best hunters begins to organize it, which itself takes time. Reading animal signs from the previous day, deciding on direction, checking weapons. Let's follow the foragers first, because foraging is the activity that occupied the most daily hours across the most people. Foraging is not simply wandering around picking up food. It is a skilled, cognitively demanding activity that required what researchers now call ecological knowledge, a deep, detailed, accumulated understanding of the landscape and everything in it. Your early human forager knew from experience and from teaching which plants in this specific region were edible, which were poisonous, and which were medicinal. They knew the seasonal cycles of every food source within a day's walk of camp. They knew which signs indicated where to dig for tubers. They could read the landscape, the presence of certain birds, the pattern of animal tracks, the condition of vegetation, in a way that extracted information about food, water, and danger simultaneously. This was not instinct. It was learned knowledge, built up over years of observation and instruction. Children learned it by coming along and watching. They began accompanying adults on foraging trips very early, not to contribute meaningfully at first, but to absorb the knowledge that would keep them alive when they were older. The walk itself might cover 4 to 8 miles in a day, depending on conditions. They weren't walking fast. They were moving slowly, reading everything, stopping, assessing, occasionally digging or climbing or wading into shallow water to collect plant material from the edges. And they were talking the entire time, pointing things out, discussing what they found, teaching the children silently through demonstration and vocally through explanation. The food they brought back, tubers, roots, berries, seeds, nuts, edible leaves, insects in some regions, eggs when they found them, would be combined with whatever the hunters brought in, if they brought anything in. Hunting success rates in modern hunter-gatherer groups vary widely, but a successful hunt is never guaranteed on any given day. Most days, the calories come primarily from plant foods gathered by the foragers. This is another thing that tends to surprise people. The image of the prehistoric hunter, spear raised, is culturally dominant. But for most early humans, in most environments, the majority of the daily caloric intake came from gathered plant foods. The hunters were essential for protein, fat, for the caloric density that plant foods alone couldn't always provide, but they were not the primary food source day to day.
Back at the camp, things were not idle. Camp maintenance was continuous, unglamorous, and critically important. The shelters, whether that meant a rock overhang, a simple structure of branches and hides, or in colder climates, something more substantial, needed tending. Animal hides needed to be scraped and worked to keep them soft and usable. Tools needed to be made and repaired. Flint knapping, the process of shaping stone into cutting tools, required skill and concentration and could occupy an experienced knapper for hours. The people who stayed at camp were typically watching the children, tending the fire, and doing exactly these kinds of slow, hands-on tasks. This was not considered less important than hunting. In most hunter-gatherer societies, the hierarchy of contribution is more fluid than we tend to imagine. The person who kept the fire burning and prepared the food for return was as necessary to the group's survival as the person who went out to get it.
Children, meanwhile, were doing what children in every human society have always done when left to their own devices, playing. And specifically, playing at the things they saw the adults do. Small children mimicking foraging, older children practicing throwing with whatever objects were available, groups of children playing social games that had the structure, without the stakes, of the real social dynamics happening around them. Play in prehistoric children was training. Not consciously structured training, not anything an adult organized or oversaw, but functionally, the games children chose to play were practice runs for adult survival skills. This pattern is so consistent across human prehistory and across modern hunter-gatherer societies that it appears to be essentially built into how children are wired. By early afternoon, the foragers are returning. The hunters may or may not be back yet. A successful hunt can take most of the day.
Now comes food preparation, and this is where something remarkable happens every single day. They cook. Of all the things that separate humans from every other species on the planet, cooking may be the most consequential and the least appreciated. Cooking, the application of heat to food before eating it, does something that raw food cannot do. It dramatically increases the caloric availability of almost everything it touches. Cooked starch is far more digestible than raw starch. Cooked protein is far more accessible to human digestion than raw protein. Cooking effectively pre-digests food, allowing our bodies to extract more energy from the same amount of material. This matters enormously because the human brain, which consumes roughly 20% of our total caloric intake despite being only 2% of our body weight, is extraordinarily expensive to run. Our big brains require a caloric subsidy that raw food alone cannot reliably provide. Cooking is, in the most literal sense, what makes human intelligence metabolically possible.
Your early human, sitting by the fire, roasting tubers and scraps of meat on the coals, was not simply making food taste better. They were running the energy infrastructure that made their own consciousness possible. There is something almost absurdly profound about that. Every time a prehistoric person cooked a meal, they were, without knowing it, fueling the cognitive machinery that allowed them to understand the world, remember their history, plan for the future, and imagine things that didn't yet exist. The meal itself would have been eaten communally. Sharing food is one of the deepest human social behaviors, present in every culture that has ever been documented. Food was distributed through the group. Not equally, perhaps, in the sense that there were social hierarchies that influenced portion sizes, but broadly. A group that hoards food internally collapses its own social fabric. Hunter-gatherer groups survive precisely because food is shared. The middle of the afternoon is, in many ways, the quietest part of the prehistoric day. If the work is done, if foraging has been successful, the fire is fed, food is prepared, then the group rests. This is not laziness. This is rational energy conservation by people who need their bodies to function reliably in a world with no medical safety net. You rest when you can because you do not know what tomorrow demands. This rest period is when storytelling often happened. And this is one of the most extraordinary aspects of early human life that almost never gets the attention it deserves. Stories. 50,000 years ago. Not written, there was no writing, but told, remembered, passed on, refined, built upon. Stories about where animals could be found and how they behaved. Stories about what happened when someone did the wrong thing or went the wrong direction. Stories about the group's history, their dead, their movements, their directions, their origins. Cave paintings, the oldest of which date back at least 45,000 years, and possibly much further, give us a glimpse into the symbolic and narrative mind of early humans. These were not just drawings. They were, researchers increasingly believe, part of a broader culture of meaning-making that involved storytelling, ceremony, shared memory, and what we would now call mythology. Your early human, resting in the afternoon shade, listening to an elder tell a story about what the great hunters of 3 generations ago once did in a valley 2 weeks' walk to the north, that person was participating in one of the oldest human activities. They were building and maintaining shared memory. They were being educated without knowing they were being educated. This is one of the oldest human activities of all, giving experience a shape that can be passed on.
As the sun begins to drop, the energy of the group shifts. There is a reason for this that is not cultural or learned, but purely biological. The approaching darkness, for most of human evolutionary history, was genuinely dangerous. Your eyes, adapted for daylight, become significantly less useful in the dark. Predators that had been resting through the hottest part of the day become active. The acoustic landscape changes. Sounds that were irrelevant at midday become significant at dusk because your brain is correctly recalibrating its threat detection systems. The group draws together. People who were dispersed through the day move back toward the fire. The children are called in. The perimeter, such as it was, contracts. Evening is when the fire becomes the center of everything. And evening is also when, for many groups, the real social ceremony of the day took place.
Music, dance, ritual. We have evidence, physical, archaeological evidence of musical instruments dating back at least 40,000 years. Bone flutes, drums, percussion instruments made from materials that have mostly not survived into the archaeological record, which means the actual history of music is probably far older than what we can directly confirm. Dance almost certainly predates instruments. Rhythmic movement as a social bonding behavior is documented across cultures that had no contact with each other, which suggests it emerges from something deep in human neurology rather than being a cultural invention. The firelit evening, the group gathered, music playing, people moving, was not frivolous. It was load-bearing social infrastructure. It maintained group cohesion. It released tension. It expressed and reinforced shared identity. It was, in the most literal sense, necessary for survival. A group that fragments, that develops internal fault lines of resentment, distance, and distrust, is a group that fails to cooperate. And a group that fails to cooperate in a world full of things that want to eat tends not to last very long. The evening fire was the maintenance ritual of the collective self.
And then it gets dark, really dark. This is the part that I think modern people most consistently underestimate. The psychological reality of genuine, total darkness. The darkness that existed before electric light, before gaslight, before even widespread candle use, is almost impossible to reconstruct from inside a world where darkness is always just one switch away. For your early human, darkness was the single most dangerous condition of the day. Everything that had been manageable in daylight became uncertain at night. The fire's radius of light was maybe 10 meters. Beyond that, nothing. Shapes, sounds without sources. The knowledge, built into 50,000 generations of nervous systems, that things with better night vision than you were out there, and that darkness was when they moved. People slept in shifts, not formally organized shifts, not a schedule posted on a cave wall, but naturally, because anxiety kept some people lighter sleepers than others, and because the fire needed tending, and because the sounds of the night needed someone to be semi-conscious enough to register when something changed. There is research suggesting that human sleep for most of our evolutionary history was biphasic, 2 separate sleep periods with a period of quiet wakefulness in between. The single consolidated 8-hour block that modern sleep medicine treats as the norm is quite possibly an artifact of artificial light changing our relationship to darkness. The original human sleep pattern may have been sleep for a few hours after dark, wake in the middle of the night for an hour or so, sleep again until dawn. That middle of the night waking period, quiet, dark, fire burning low, is when some historians and anthropologists speculate people thought and prayed and experienced the particular quality of consciousness that belongs only to the deepest part of the night. Not anxious wakefulness, something older than anxiety, something closer to vigil. And then they slept again. And somewhere out there, at the edge of the firelight, something was probably still moving.
Here is what I want to leave you with. The early human who woke before dawn to tend the fire, who walked 8 miles to find food, who cooked a meal they ate communally, who listened to stories in the afternoon sun, who danced by firelight as darkness fell, who slept in short shifts with one ear always half open to the sounds of the night, that person was not a simpler version of you. They were a fully equipped human being with a brain of equal complexity to yours, processing a world of incomparably greater immediate difficulty, and doing it with a social competence and an ecological intelligence that most modern humans have entirely lost. They had no privacy, they had no quiet, they had no solitude unless they wanted to risk the landscape alone. They had no accumulated wealth, no property, no security beyond the competence of the group around them and the fire at the center of it.
And they had something else, something that is genuinely difficult to name. A quality of presence, of being completely inside the day, because the day was the only thing there was, that modern humans tend to spend a lot of money and meditation retreats trying to artificially reconstruct. Every wall you slip behind tonight is the solution to a problem someone in your bloodline could not solve. Every meal you eat without thinking about where it came from is the answer to a question your ancestors spent the best hours of every day trying to answer. The warmth you take for granted when you wake up, the fact that you do not open your eyes in darkness with a dying fire and something large moving 30 meters away, that is not the default state of human existence. It is an achievement. A staggering, hard-won, 10,000-year accumulation of answered problems. The early humans' normal day ended the way it always ended. Fire burning, group breathing, darkness held, just barely at the edge of the light. And then they did it again, and again, and again, until, eventually, we didn't have to anymore.